All right, well, my clock says 1:32, so let's go ahead and get started. We've got about 24 screens up for now, so thank you all. We'll start the recording now. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Perry Clausen, the Executive Director of Valley Water Collaborative. And this is our continuing stakeholder meetings on the Valley Water Collaborative and Modesto-Turlock Management Zone plan development. And before we get started, I want to have Lydia go through our web action, Zoom action protocols and explain how to ask questions and other things. So, Lydia.
Thank you, Perry. Hi, everybody. So a couple of things here on this slide I'd like to cover before we dive into the major content of the meeting. The first item here is to make sure that we capture proper attendance on this meeting. If everybody here could look at the participant list and make sure that your first and last name is represented for your person on the participant list. That would be most appreciated. If it's not, you have the ability to rename yourself in the participant list, or you could send me an email with your first and last name and I can update it for you. Alternatively, if you want to place it in the chat, I can also update your name on the participant list that way as well. Everyone should remain on mute during the presentation unless we get to a Q&A period, and then you can unmute yourself to ask a question. During the Q&A period of the presentation, we'll have several periods where we'll stop and ask if anyone has any questions. At that time, you can either raise your hand and you'll be called on to unmute yourself and ask your question. Alternatively, you can type your question into the chat and I can read that question to Perry, or Perry can read it himself and answer the question that way. If you're having technical difficulty during the presentation, go ahead and use the chat to reach out, and I will do my best, or one of the other presenters will try and do their best to help you work through those technical issues. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and one more thing to mention, we will be having a community outreach meetings next week that will have Spanish translation available. We don't have that feature on this meeting, and if we do need to offer that in the future, please let us know. We aren't set up for that today, but we have a really good translator that can help us out if that's needed. Okay, then we'll get started. Next slide. So today, the meeting purposes, we want to introduce this pre-submittal public draft. So there's going to be two different times that the public has the ability to comment on our plans. That is the draft we just released. We have a deliverable in March 8th, that will go to the regional board, and then they will release that plan through Lyris, so there'll be another comment period. So today is really an early pre-submittal public draft that you get a chance to give us feedback on, and we certainly appreciate any feedback. So it's going to be the preliminary management zone, and I put the abbreviations here because we may be using those in future days and months ahead. But the PMZP, the early action plan, EAP, and then we want to, of course, facilitate any of the review and comment process, or talk about it today. And the key topics you see listed below, it's an overview, but there's a couple of sections we're going to emphasize on this potentially impacted residents and the public water systems. We haven't talked a lot about that in previous meetings. So we've done some work in that and understanding what systems are out there that may have exceedances either currently or in the past. And then, of course, details on the early action plan. And next slide. So this is the preliminary management zone proposal. You can go to the next slide. So it is now posted, as you saw in many of you got the notice, it is now currently posted on our website, and we're going to be making a little change on the website in the next few days. But now if you opened it up at this minute, you'll see on the top of the screen, the background picture on the right hand, we have more. So click on more, and then you'll see the plan as you see in the screen pulled out on the left. And each one of those titles is an individual PDF. You can open those and review any of those segments you'd like. And as you can see, these are both offered in Spanish and in English. And so those options are available. Next slide. So the draft documents, very complete, a lot of information in there. By February 1, we have these, as we mentioned, they're posted yesterday. We have those 2 plans and the key sections you can see listed here, 1 through 7, that are set up through the plan templates that were developed. Somebody is mentioning on chat that the slides are blurry. Mine are clear, so it may be your connection.
Mine are clear as well, Perry.
Okay, what you might try doing, those that have problems, is, or I guess it's Amanda, is just log off and log back in. Sometimes the connection may be blurred. So anyway, you can see here the sections. And when you go to the website, you can also see these same sections that you would click on to read these individual segments. And in this meeting, we'll be going over the key points in each of those. So next slide. So just want to give you a little background on Valley Water Collaborative and our purpose of the organization. We've talked about this before. Some of you may be new to this outreach effort. So we were formed to implement on behalf of WDR holders the nitrate control program. And this overview is, or this program is mandated by the Basin Plan Amendment that was recently changed by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. Key components of that Basin Plan Amendment for the nitrate control program is that you can participate in a management zone. There is the individual option. There are some WDR holders that are pursuing that, but we're focused on what's called Pathway B. That's the management zone formation. And in the Modesto and Modesto and Turlock basins, the stakeholders there have agreed, and we formed the Valley Water Collaborative. Last summer, August 2020, we created this nonprofit organization and undertook the beginning of the development of these plans, hiring consultants and forming committees and such to start working on this. We are staying with the boundaries of the Modesto and Turlock subbasins defined by the Department of Water Resources. So as part of forming the management zone, we have already had stakeholder and community outreach meetings. We will continue that as we go forward in these developing, releasing, and refining these plans. But what we're working from, if you will, is in contacting and informing Valley Water and the participants is the discharger list that the Regional Water Board provided us and all the other management zones in the Central Valley. So you see the conceptual model there on the right. We anticipate adding the Merced subbasin to this organization. They are a priority 2 basin. So in the prioritization process set up for nitrate control program, Modesto and Turlock were in priority 1. So we got our notice to comply. Merced will likely get it in about a year to 18 months. So they are essentially the basins that will be covered by Valley Water. And the organization is primarily the business management function of the nitrate control program. We have a board of directors made up of dischargers, agriculture, dairy, cities, wineries, and food processors. And then once we roll into the implementation phase, and this will be after the early action plan is submitted, we're forming, or in the process of forming, these sub-basin committees, and they will be in charge of and provide recommendations to the board on what needs to be specifically done in those areas. And they will be made up again of the WDR holders in those areas. And we are seeking participants in those committees. You don't need to be on the board or a WDR holder. If you're interested in being on those committees, please let us know, and we'll add you to the circulation list once these committees begin meeting officially. So next slide. So the characterization of the management zone has been done. Now it's been completed. It is included in the plan, and it takes into account all the factors you see listed here. Most importantly, of course, is the geography. We use, as I mentioned, these basin boundaries from the Department of Water Resources, but we also use a lot of the data, the monitoring data of the basin to help prioritize the areas and indicate where there are likely to be nitrate issues. But we've also been reaching out to talk to the groundwater sustainability agencies, the GSAs in the region, and any water management agencies, drinking water systems, disadvantaged community representatives, and any of the land use, significant land use operations in that region. Okay, next slide, please. So the initial assessment of the groundwater conditions was pretty extensive. This is the maps that were created using the kriging approach, and we used groundwater elevations and the flow of groundwater that have been determined in previous studies, and then insofar as determining the levels of nitrate, we're using an upper zone delineation, it's called. So this is the nitrate levels that have been measured in previous activities of that upper zone, and it's generally characterized as above the Corcoran clay layer. And then as you see indicated, we overlaid the nitrate groundwater quality. And this, we're not going to go into a lot of detail, we covered it in previous meetings, but this represents about the last 10 years of data that we used to create this. And Barbara is going to be on a little later if some others have questions about that. So next slide. So the management zone participants are also listed in the draft plan, draft program plan, and it's generally consisting of irrigated agriculture, concentrated animal feeding operations, which are milk cows, the bovine feeding, and the poultry operations, and then the individual waste discharge requirement entities. Those are cities primarily and others, but there's 14 that were on the list that we received from the regional board. 7 are participating, and then Turlock, there were 20 WDR holders. Currently 11 are participating. And when I say participating, that means they've given us a positive indication that they are going to be involved. There are probably another half of those that are not included, 7 of the 14 that are considering it. And then there's some that have decided to take pathway A, which is the individual approach. And so section 5 will include the list of these. Section 4 includes the name. Section 5 includes a summary of the nitrate treatment technologies that are used by these either industries or individual operations. And I say industries, so for instance, irrigated lands program, we describe the nitrogen fertilizer reporting, the outlier designation, the groundwater trend monitoring, and all the activities that irrigated ag is undertaking, has been for the last 5 years. We include that in a summary, a very, very easy to read summary on irrigated lands members or growers. And then similar with these individual wastewater treatment plants or wineries and such, they provide a very succinct summary of the activities that they do within their operation. So next slide, please. So the other elements of this plan, section 6, the overview of the early action plan, the community outreach plan, identification of impacted water users, and you can read through these, process to identify affected areas, community outreach, the interim, the options that we've come up for the replacement water, and then the schedule for this early action plan. And then section 7 addresses the final regulatory requirements that are needed for the final management zone proposal. So you'll see this later, but just to remind you, this is a preliminary proposal. Then the final proposal is due at the end of 2021, roughly. And so that will be a further refinement of this plan We will have the early action plan that will be implemented here in coming months, and we'll get back to that in a minute. Okay, next slide. So the very important part of this process is identifying these impacted areas. You saw that map a little earlier that shows where the high nitrate areas have been indicated through the mapping and the monitoring process. And then we'll describe how we're going to target these areas for the early action plan. So the next slide. So step one, we've done already. We did this groundwater nitrate assessment. And you'll see in later slides, we estimated the number of potentially impacted domestic wells. And this is wells that were identified outside of the public water systems. And then using census data, we've estimated the number of potentially impacted individuals and families and populations from that mapped area. Okay, the next slide. So again, these potentially impacted areas through the groundwater nitrate assessment, we did this upper layer identification of nitrate levels post 2010, and then came up with the averages and then the ambient that was used post 2010. So these maps were a genesis of that information. Next slide. So I'm going to hand this over to Richard. Richard, I think I went a little long on the slides, but we covered
That's
everything.
all right. Actually, we're going to hand this over to Barb with Ludorf Scalabrini to take it from here.
Sure. Thanks, Richard and Perry. So this slide represents the number of domestic wells that we found using a GIS technique to use well completion reports from the Department of Water Resources and the locations associated with them to get an idea of what the nitrate conditions are in domestic wells throughout both the Modesto and Turlock subbasins. So the table below the map shows kind of a separation of nitrate conditions between either safe drinking water conditions based on nitrate conditions less than the MCL, or the red letters or in the red numbers that represent the number of domestic wells that are in the red areas on the map that represents unsafe areas of drinking water for nitrate conditions that are potentially impacted. So you can see on the map the purple outlines or the purple shapes that are on the map represent known public water system service areas. So the idea here is we assume that if somebody lived within the service area and were receiving water from a public water system, then they probably wouldn't be relying solely on their domestic well for drinking water. And so those domestic wells, we weren't counting them in this particular count. So let's see, if you want to take a look at the numbers, you can see from the table that there are an estimated 353 domestic wells in the Modesto management zone that are potentially impacted, and about 1,700 wells in the Turlock management zone that are potentially impacted. So that makes a total of more than 2,000 domestic wells that are located within those red areas on the map and are potentially impacted in both subbasins. There were many more domestic wells in the safe nitrate level areas compared to unsafe areas in the Modesto management zone. So you could see only 27% of the domestic wells located outside of those known public water system boundaries fell within the red areas on the map, whereas slightly more than half of the domestic wells in the Turlock management zone lie in areas where nitrate levels are above the safe drinking water standard and are potentially impacted. Next slide, please. So for population, you can see the breakdown of populations living outside of known public water system boundaries for each nitrate level group that we saw on the map. So groups 1 and 2 were the dark green and light green colored shading on the ambient nitrate in the upper zone map. Group 3 was the yellow area. Group 4 is the orange area where nitrate levels are getting higher but still below the MCL. And then group 5 is the red area where nitrate is estimated to be unsafe and above the MCL. Also on this table is group 6, which represents data gap areas where we don't have any control points or enough data to make an educated guess at what the nitrate levels would be. Luckily, this was a relatively small area comparatively for both management zones. You can see here that the Modesto management zone had an estimated population of 4,546 living outside of known public water system boundaries and in areas where nitrate levels are potentially unsafe to drink. In the Turlock management zone, that number rises to over 37,400 people that are potentially impacted by elevated nitrate conditions. So in total, almost 42,000 people in this region of the Central Valley are potentially impacted by elevated nitrate. Next slide, please. This summary slide presents the potential nitrate impacts for the entire Valley Water Collaborative region. Perry, I wasn't sure if you wanted to discuss this further, or I can run through these numbers as well.
Yeah, I guess the previous two slides give a very good detailed breakdown of these various levels of nitrate and the number of corresponding wells. And when we look at our Valley Water Collaborative area that's covered, these numbers give us a pretty good cumulative totals of what we're potentially facing. And the reason each of these has a 7.5 to 10 is we know nitrate levels vary, and just so we are conservative in our estimates, we're including them in this total. Right or wrong, I'm not certain, but it just gives us an upper limit probably. I would guess, and we're going into some of this with a lot of discovery ahead of us. And so we roughly have 44,356 wells that may be over domestic wells, that may be over the standard, and that it is impacting a population of over 50,000 people in the two basin area.
Or if I may jump in, the 43 included all the other categories of water quality. So the air is mined. The total is about 2,700 total wells.
Oh, okay. That sounds way better.
It does sound better.
Anyway, but it's still the point, 2,000 wells is a lot of wells. So in those would be, we're going to be making a concerted effort to contact all of those beginning shortly in the next couple of months. So I think that was all for that. Barbara, anything more on that?
Nope, I'm good. We could
Okay.
go to the next slide, please. So now we'll switch gears and discuss the public water systems. So the idea here is to make sure that people living within those public water system boundaries that we showed in the purple lines on the map earlier, or who have the ability to get their drinking water from public water systems, are actually getting safe drinking water from these public water systems. Next slide, please. So within the early action plan, there's a section that discusses various topics having to do with public water systems and their public supply wells, their treatment, as well as their compliance status. These topics are discussed in the EAP text, or the early action plan text, with lengthy detailed tables showing up in Appendix E, which you don't need to go through, but I'll summarize it for you. Next slide, please. So this slide is just providing you with how the data is available to us, the public, for use in determining where nitrate issues occur within the management zones and within public water systems themselves. So the first data source is the Division of Drinking Water, which has what's called an electronic data transfer, which is how they collect their data. And this data comes straight from accredited laboratories for untreated or raw sources, as well as treated sources. So the public water system would take a sample from either their well or somewhere on their distribution line, send it to a lab, and the lab sends it to the Division of Drinking Water. And those data are available to us, to the public, to download and look at. This data can be downloaded and queried to attain well names, well statuses. So that means whether it's an active well, if it's an abandoned well or destroyed well, if it's inactive or a standby well, which means they're not using it currently. There's also a field that indicates whether the nitrate sample is associated with a raw or untreated sample, which again would mean that it came straight from the ground through a public supply well, or the sample might be from a treated source after the water system has maybe blended it or used reverse osmosis or ion exchange or other forms of water treatment prior to serving it to their population. Lastly, and what we used this data set for, was the historic and current record of nitrate samples for all of the wells and water sources within a public water system. So the next couple of slides will show you how we can use this information for the early action plan document itself. The next source of public water system data is again from the state government, but this source is called the Safe Drinking Water Information System, or Drinking Water Watch. Again, this is another publicly available data source, so anybody can go on this website and check it out. But this source is a little bit more painstaking to get any information out of, because you have to actually type in the public system name or number and then go through one at a time to get a look at what kind of information about that public water system you need individually, instead of just using a simple database query that would dump the data that you need for the entire management zone area. Anyway, but this source can provide very accurate information and up-to-date information about water systems and the number of connections, the population served, what type of water system they are, links to PDF documents of consumer confidence reports, and most importantly for our purposes, a link to see any violations or enforcement actions that have been taken on the water system due to any issues they may have experienced currently or in the past. That would make them in compliance or out of compliance. So of course, there are many disconnects between these two data sets, even though they are technically from the same branch of state government. So we just had to reconcile those differences. Next slide, please. So for the early action plan, we tried to get a sense of where nitrate has caused problems within public water systems, both in the past and currently. This map shows a historic picture of public supply wells and their nitrate levels. So those public supply wells that have experienced nitrate levels above the MCL show up as salmon colored triangles, the kind of pinkish orange red. Hard to tell what color it is on your screen, but and those public supply wells that have never had a sample exceeding 10 milligrams per liter nitrate as nitrogen show up as green triangles. So in all, there have been 56 public supply wells that have experienced nitrate exceedances in Modesto, and in Turlock, the management zone in Turlock, there were about 85 public supply wells that have experienced nitrate exceedances at some point in their history. Out of those public supply wells, a smaller subset are considered to be active today. So this means that these public supply wells are still being used to provide drinking water to the system, but it does not, however, necessarily mean that the systems they belong to are serving water with unsafe levels of nitrate, just that these wells have experienced a nitrate problem in the past, and we should be aware of them and their location where they have occurred. In the next slide, I will talk about the systems those wells belong to and what their treatment capabilities are. So next slide, please. These two maps show public water supply wells that have exceeded the nitrate MCL in the past. So it's a subset of the wells that we saw in the previous slide. It's only those kind of pinkish colored wells. And now they're overlaid on the ambient nitrate to get a sense of how, even though production wells are typically drilled to a deeper depth and the ambient nitrate is representative of the upper zone, it's still good to know where nitrate conditions are affecting these public supply wells within both management zones. Sorry, so the colors of the wells indicate what the well status is, where blue colored symbols represent active supply wells. There's more details in this map if you're interested. There's the type of water system they belong to, which is represented by the shape of the well symbol. Also, the map shows just labels of which systems have treatment capabilities that are useful against nitrate contamination. So it's kind of hard to tell, but if you squint, you can see labels such as GAC, or that stands for granular activated carbon, which can be a treatment system for nitrate. Also, you might see RO for reverse osmosis, or IX for ion exchange, or blending as another treatment type that is useful for taking care of nitrate problems. Another reason I produced this map is to identify systems that have a treated source that has been sampled to contain water that exceeds the nitrate standard for safe drinking water. So let me just explain what that means. That means that a water system has gone through the process of treatment, and then they take a sample somewhere on their distribution line and send that sample to the lab, and the lab sends it back saying that the nitrate level in that treated sample is above the MCL, or it exceeds the safe drinking water standard. So it's a higher number than 10 milligrams per liter as nitrate or as nitrogen. Those systems on these maps are circled with a purple circle around them, so you could see where this has occurred. That means that although the system has some treatment capabilities, their treated water was still found to be above the safe drinking water standard for nitrate. Again, this doesn't necessarily mean that the public water system is out of compliance. It could have been a problem in the past and they have fixed it. But it's good to know where this occurs. And in the next slide, we'll talk about these out of compliance systems. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is the last slide that I'll be talking about today, and it provides a current snapshot of any public water system that is currently, as of January 2021, currently out of compliance due to a nitrate issue. So in the Modesto management zone, we found that there are 6 public water systems that are currently out of compliance due to unsafe levels of drinking of nitrate alone. This translates to a population served of about 350 people. For the Turlock management zone, I found that a total of 5 public water systems are currently out of compliance for nitrate, but 2 of those 5 systems also have exceedances of other co-contaminants in addition to nitrate, causing them to be out of compliance. The co-contaminants currently in exceedance for these 2 systems are arsenic and or 1,2,3-TCP. The estimated total population served in the Turlock management zone from currently out of compliance public water systems is 77 people due to nitrate alone, plus an additional 105 people for systems with nitrate and a co-contaminant. So we can use this information to help us identify potentially affected residents during implementation of the early action plan. Richard will speak more about how in the next section, all about the early action plan. And if you have any questions specifically about any of these systems, let me know. Take it away, Richard.
All right, next slide, please. All right, so when Perry was going through the list of sections that are in the preliminary management zone proposal, section 6 was identified as the early action plan and as an overview. And so what we've done is in the proposal itself, we have a section that kind of gives you, I would say, almost an executive summary level description of what is in the early action plan, the key components, but you go to what is attachment E to the proposal to actually read the early action plan. So it's a separate document. There's one for the Modesto management zone. There's a separate one for the Turlock management zone. They're actually very similar. They have a little bit, they'll have a section that describes the baseline information that is different. It's unique to each management zone, but the programs are very similar right now for both. In time, one reason we kept them separate is in time with community input, we may find that there's a desire to do some different things in different management zones. And so it's easier down the road to be able to adjust an individual management zone's early action plan as appropriate. But for now, if you read one of them as part of your review, you'll find a lot of similarities in the other document as well. The purpose of the early action plan, it's a key component of the nitrate control program, is the actual plan itself. What are you going to do as a management zone to provide safe drinking water for those dependent on groundwater from wells that exceed the nitrate safe drinking water standard? So it's very focused on nitrate. It's about early actions, hence the name early action plan. And early actions are those deemed to be short-term and temporary. So they're not the ultimate solution. The nitrate control program does call for long-term permanent solutions to be developed over time. And these will be activities that the management zone will work on as they move forward in time. The last part on this slide is the key required elements. These are very short paraphrases of what is in the regulation, but they highlight 3 key points that we want to talk a little bit more about, particularly the first and last points as we go forward in this presentation today. The first is it needs to have a process to identify affected residents and conducting outreach to them to make sure they are able to participate in the implementation of the early action plan. The second one is a process to coordinate with non-dischargers to address drinking water issues. Non-discharger is kind of a general term that's described in the document. But we're talking about people like yourselves. Some of you on this call today, you may be operating a water system or an irrigation district, or you have some interest in safe water for the area. For example, those community-based organizations that are working with residents right now on their own programs to provide safe drinking water. So when Barb mentioned co-contaminants a minute ago, an important component is there a way to collaborate with other programs and other efforts to make sure entities have safe drinking water? And then very importantly, the early action plan has a very detailed schedule with milestones so that we can make sure we stay on track in implementing the program. What's not on this list is what I'm actually going to spend most of the time focusing on is what is the actual program that is part of the early action or the early actions going forward. So next slide. All right, so let's talk about that. And we use a general term called the interim replacement water program when we talk about the early actions. There are 3 components to this program. 2 of them are household based. So what we would basically say very specific to the household, to the resident's needs. Those are the 2 items on the left. One is home bottled water delivery. The second is install point of use treatment systems in the home. So this would be solutions where you work with the resident that have nitrate concerns and to define or to implement a program that works best for their home. They'll also include, if sufficient community interest is there, what we call water fill stations. These are community-wide options. These are kind of blanket options to catch other people that may not be interested in bottled water delivery or a point of use system in their home, but they just rather have a place they can go to obtain safe drinking water anytime. Water fill stations is a way to do that. Some of these have been implemented in other places in the Central Valley, and they can provide a quick, convenient way for those who wish to obtain that water. But in the way the early action plans are developed right now, the focus is on home bottled water, install point of use, and work with the community to decide, do they want fill stations in either the Modesto or the Turlock management zones. Next slide. So the plan includes steps to coordinate with residents so we can work with them to see which interim solutions work best for them. For those that are interested in receiving bottled water or a point of use treatment system, we're now working at the household level. So there'll be 3 criteria that we want to make sure they can show or work with us to show that they can meet. Very first and very important is that they're in the management zone. So if they're in the Modesto or the Turlock management zone, that they actually live in these areas. The resident should be willing to sign an agreement with a service provider. When the management zone implements a bottled water program or a point of use treatment program, they will work with businesses or vendors that provide those types of services. Often these vendors have their own agreements that they need adhered to provide the services in the home. And so we had that stipulation that the resident must be willing to work with them to establish any agreements that are necessary. And last and probably the most important is, do they actually have a domestic well that is serving them drinking water in their home that it has unsafe nitrate levels defined as greater than 10, which is the MCL for nitrate. And so that becomes a key question that needs to be addressed in the early action plan. Next slide. To address that question, there is a well testing program to support implementation of the selection of interim solutions. The management zone at no cost to the resident will come out and send a representative to come out to the home and to sample the well to see what the nitrate levels are. We do have an option where the resident, if they have their own well data already, and it was done by a certified laboratory, they can submit those data and they can skip the well testing step. But we're assuming that most people probably have not had their well tested. So we're providing a program for a representative to come out and sample. Even though this program is being set up, well testing being set up to address this question about bottled water versus point of use system, any resident at any time, the program can call or contact the Valley Water Collaborative and have their well tested, regardless of their concerns about obtaining water through one solution versus another. They simply can get their well tested by contacting the organization. Once a well is tested, the resident or homeowner will receive results. They will also be apprised of what their next steps could be based on what the well test results are. If the well test results show that nitrate's greater than 10, then the Valley Water Collaborative will work immediately with them to decide, do they want bottled water? Do they want point of use for their home, and to start that service as quickly as possible. If it's less than 10, but greater than 8, so it's high, and it might be a concern down the road, but it's not a concern immediately, the early action plan does include the opportunity for additional well testing in the future. So there's a check that can be made periodically to make sure the water quality is not actually getting worse. As part of the well testing program, the Valley Water Collaborative will be working or looking for opportunities with other entities that are implementing drinking water programs, testing for other contaminants, whether it be TCP or arsenic or other constituents that may be of concern in the area, to try and create a most cost-effective program as possible. Next slide. So I'm going to talk briefly about the third alternative. Everything to do with well testing and above is to focus on making sure we target those residents that want a solution in their home. But we also know there will be some that may not want to have something in their home. They may want just access to a general community-wide service. As we indicated, we'll call those water fill stations. There's examples of these that have been implemented in other places, and they get a fair amount of use depending on the particular need of the community. If we implement these, or at least the need for implementing will be determined with community input. So the way the early action plan is structured is that we'll spend 2021, the rest of this year, working with the community to make a final decision. Would fill stations be a viable alternative that is of interest to the community? And if so, where would be ideal locations to place them? Likely would they be targeted in the red areas that are shown in these two figures here, one from Modesto and Turlock, because those are the areas that most likely have domestic wells that exceed the nitrate standard. If agreement with the community can be reached and there is interest in having fill stations as a third option in the community, installation likely would begin by about 2022. Next slide. So implementation of the action plan happens fairly soon. The deliverables for the preliminary management zone proposal, the target date is March 8th, which is coming up very quickly. The early action plan, per the regulation, needs to begin implementation by May 7th, within 60 days of submittal of the proposal. The only reason it would not be implemented sooner or by that date would be if the regional board were to notify the management zone that they have concerns with the plan. But right now, we are assuming we will be implementing by May 7th. To implement, there will be different ways that we will be coordinating with the community. And these different examples are shown here. First, we will have in the middle, I'll start with that. There's a continued community meetings. We'll have some next week, for example, but we'll continue that process of having community meetings so that we can engage directly with people who are actually living in the area. The goal is to move to in-person meetings at some point, but for now, if we have to stay on virtual, we will do that. But it'd be ideal if we can actually meet with the community directly. Those will occur on a quarterly basis as planned for the rest of 2021 and on into 2022. But we're also going to have a supplemental type of outreach. We call it targeted outreach on the left there. We may phase this depending on the need. But this is to actually identify residents by location, their addresses, and actually send them information. So they're not just having to hear by word of mouth, email, their neighbor, a sign they saw, a notice they saw in a store. They actually have something they've received indicating what the program's all about and what their options are, including well testing for their home. In the end, anybody can contact the management zone at any time. We will continue to publicize Valley Water Collaborative, publicize the early action plan, so that when someone sees that, hey, there's potentially an opportunity here to have my well tested to see if I have safe water for nitrate, they don't have to wait to receive something in the mail. They can contact the collaborative directly. Next slide. So just some quick schedule of milestones. There's a much more detailed figure in the proposal and in the early action plans, and there's also a detailed table that lists out the milestones that go with each of these general activities. But the basic components are on the left. We talked about different parts of these in the last few minutes. The 2021 schedule is targeted out is to hopefully have it as quickly as possible, but by the end of Q2, so by in June of this year, is to get direct mail targeted to specific residents that we believe are most likely impacted by nitrate, and then follow up with them through the rest of the year. As I mentioned, the general outreach, quarterly community meetings are planned. The first to kick off the early action plan in May of 2021, and then continue through the rest of the year into 2022. We plan to start the bottled water POU system installation programs immediately. Once that information is out that the program is active, if we are contacted right away, they will be responded to right away. Water fill stations, as I indicated, we will work with the community over the year to decide where, how much, how many stations do you want? Do you want any stations in your area? And then focus on installation in 2022. And then there is a requirement periodically to have status reports to keep not just the community informed, but the stakeholders like you on this call, to keep the regional board informed as to the progress that we're making in the implementation of the early action plan. Next slide.
Before you leave that slide, one thing I wanted to add is the startup day of May 7th for both of those aspects, the well testing and bottled water. We are going to begin identifying vendors and getting putting out for bids starting in March. So when we say startup, we're going to be rolling out the activities. It's not we're going to start identifying who might do the well testing. So we'll be ready. We'll be ready to roll, if you will, first early March. So you can go to the next slide. All right, just to wrap this up, I want to describe how how you can comment on these draft documents, review some of these upcoming dates and activities, and where you can get more information. And if you could go to the next slide. So comments on the actual plan themselves, we'd ask that you email them to the email address that you see listed here. You're also welcome to call me. I have figured out how to, what would you call it? Screen the calls of people that are trying to sell me insurance. So if you call, I will do my best to pick up unless it says spam potential. Actually, the trick is dial back twice. And if I don't pick up the first time. And then there's an online feedback form I'd really like folks to look at. It's going to be a really easy way to respond to the early action plan components. So that should take you, it's got about, I don't know, 10, 11 questions you could go through quite quickly. Be helpful for us to get some early reaction. And then as I mentioned, this email address, you want to send out long, any length of comments that you think we should be included. And as far, I see a question popping up here. What will qualify sufficient community interest to make a kiosk? Do folks need homeowner permission for the individual household solutions? Is targeted outreach to households going to be in English and Spanish? I'll start with the last question first. Absolutely, English and Spanish both. And we're actually looking into a possible third language. There is a Punjab population. We may consider translating some of the materials. And as far as the homeowner permission for individual solutions, I would say that the board, the Valley Water Collaborative Board, is leaning toward, for sure, the point of use system is going to need the homeowner's permission. Bottled water, maybe not. Certainly not the kiosks, but when you make a modification to a home and you set up a service agreement, that's going to be a contractual arrangement to make modifications in the home. So I think that's going to be very likely to be a requirement for the point of use. The bottled water, we still need to talk about that, but there does need to be an agreement with the whoever occupies the home for the delivery of the water, the return of the empty containers, timing, scheduling, all those sorts things need to be made, of course, with the homeowner. Okay, the next slide. Well, one more thing, February 22nd, close of business. We'd appreciate all the comments by then. And again, what I mentioned earlier, This goes to the regional board March 8th, and then it's released again for another public comment period. And I believe, Richard, that's 30-day comment period that is going to be.
Yes, I believe the regulations specific on 30 days minimum.
Yeah, for sure, minimum 30, whether it's more or not sure. Okay, and then the next slide. Some of the upcoming outreach events next week. We're going to be having pretty much the same presentation you see here. We have 2 lists that we've developed of both the stakeholder group and the community groups that we are sending announcements to. So those dates and times you see here next the 9th and the 10th. One is earlier in the day, 2 to 3, and then early evening from 6 to 7. And then it's mentioned several times, March 8th is our big deadline coming up. And then Central Valley is providing more opportunity to review and comment, as I mentioned too, in that 30-day comment period. And then the program rolls out May 7th, unless the board indicates that early action plan is incomplete. And I'm the glass half full kind of guy, and we have regional board representatives on the phone right now. One who I won't name because we know each other quite well. He would have told me, he will be telling me very soon if there are shortages or discrepancies that we need to fix, if there are any. So we're hopeful that there's not any reason that our plan will be deemed incomplete. Okay, next slide. Final slide, and then we'll open it up for comments. Here again is these contact information, the nitrate control program, everything you want to know about it. You could go to this web address, the Central Valley Salinity Coalition that was part of CV Salts. Our website has links to these documents. You have my email there, phone number on the other slide, and then our website where you can sign up to receive these updates. And if you didn't get a notification here in the last couple of days about the plan being released, let us know and we'll make sure you get on that list. And then this presentation we recorded and it will be posted on the website in a few days. And then the past meetings are also archived on the website. And we're working to transition the website to, as I mentioned earlier, to the ability to switch all of the documents over to Spanish. So you'll see an actual Spanish website. But right now, what's posted are the documents that were in that table of contents. And then a question here, will public comment provided the Valley Water before the 27th be included as official public comments on the drafts submitted to the Central Water Board? Now, official public comments, I don't know if Catherine wants to verify that, but when I think official comments, that is the approach that the regional board uses where they print the comments and then have a response next to it. Richard, are we, if that is what she means, are we going to be doing that?
Yes, we have, in fact, there's a placeholder in the Plumbing Management Zone proposal. It's attachment D4 that's blank right now that is intended to be a response to comments. And so while we're not in a formal public review like the board would carry out, we still intend to document comments and our responses to them.
Okay, good. All right, anybody else want to come off mute and ask a live question or chat is available?
Hi, Perry. This is Amanda Monaco with Leadership Council. Thanks for answering my other questions above. I did have one other question about what do you think will qualify as kind of enough community interest to create a kiosk, and how will, yeah.
You know, I don't want to be flippant about that, but I think we'll know it when we hear it. If we have 1 or 2 people that say, well, we want a kiosk, not so sure that's going to warrant the expense. And part of the reason we're making sure there's going to be a need is there are some kiosks installed already in the South Valley that have free water. Some of them are getting very widely used, but some are hardly being used at all. And they were done under a different program. So because of the cost, these are not inexpensive. There's permitting requirements. There is the maintenance, ongoing maintenance. We want to make sure these fill stations will be used if we make that commitment and investment. And it's not that we don't want to use those. In fact, the ideal would be everybody says, let's do kiosks. We don't want any bottled water. That would be the ideal, but that's not a realistic expectation. In fact, there are some that are very critical of fill station in the regulatory community, that we want to be conscious of that, and we don't want to just presume that people are ready to go to a fill station.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as giving you a number, I think it's hard to say at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that makes it economically, reasonable. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and we've initiated some surveys with employees of some of our contacts in those communities, and we're hoping to get an early indication just from a survey of several thousand people. Hopefully they all respond, to give us an idea of whether or not that's going to be something we just really need to get going on sooner than later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most residents that we work with about 30 communities in the San Joaquin Valley and the Eastern Coachella Valley, and most folks that we work with, given the options, would probably pick the household, the household specific solutions. But it'll be really interesting. I'm glad y'all are putting all the options out there and letting folks kind of choose what works best for them.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I'm going to put Adam on the spot. Adam, are you still with us? You got any thoughts, or Ann Walters, that you'd like clarified?
Perry, it also looks like Catherine Robinson has a question.
Okay. Is her hand raised? Go ahead, Catherine.
All right, thank you. And yeah, I appreciate it. I never know when to do the hand raise icon or just jump in, but thank you so much for the presentation. And just to clarify, yeah, I'm Catherine Robinson. I'm from California Rural Legal Assistance. And my question was to piggyback off of the previous question with regards to the in-home filtration system. And I'm curious whether there are any ideas floating around about which models or which products may be offered, if you've gotten to that point yet.
Well, previous experience with point of use treatment is that the water quality, not just nitrate, but the water quality, hardness, salts, and other things really dictate the level and the type of treatment that's needed. There's other factors that play into a system installation that includes the pressure of the pump that supplies water to the house. There's other considerations. So what we're going to do is try to find one that's obviously very reliable and cost effective, but we are going to be using a point of use installer system that has a service agreement. So we're not going to pay for a POU that goes in a house and you're on your own. It's going to have an established service agreement, probably on a quarterly basis, based on experience that I have in other regions, that dictates that service, so that they ensure that system is actually performing as promised. So that there is those considerations. And again, we're gonna as part of our makeup as an organization, we're gonna be putting out a request for proposals from firms we have already contacted to get quotes. So we had some idea who's out there offering this service, and then we'll be reviewing those quotes and those companies and their reputation to decide which particular system would be installed for the point of use.
Okay, great, thank you.
And Catherine, if I may add, we do have a section in the early action plan that kind of describes what Perry just said, so that it's not to be interpreted that if somebody wants a point of use, it's automatic. It has to work for their home, and a process to figure that out. And so there may be more than one type of unit that a vendor offers depending on their particular situation. But we do say in there that if it doesn't work, there's a problem where a point of use is just not the best choice, that they still can put a bottle of water. It's not like they're kicked out. they do have another alternative they can go to. Also, the maintenance is presumed to include monitoring, and that the vendor would be coming in periodically to verify that the point of view system is still working.
Yeah, one vendor that we talked to prior to in development of this plan, they don't even offer bottled water anymore. They've been doing point of use systems for over 10 years. So there's a lot of experience in this area for people getting these point of use systems. So I think we've got a history, institutional history, if you will, with that point of use treatment systems that work in our conditions that are in Modesto and Turlock.
Okay, great. Thank you for that explanation. I appreciate it.
Terry, this is Miguel, City of Modesto. I heard you mention that you were going to try to send a mailer to those most likely affected by the nitrate. Would that be done by kind of creating a list of those residents within the nitrate affected areas, maybe outside of a public water system that's serving good water, not necessarily based on the DWR list of wells they provided?
Yes, it would be only directed. Well, the survey as it's drafted now, the first question is, do you get water from a public water system? If they answer yes, then they don't need to answer the questionnaire, or we're not asking for them to answer. It's only strictly targeted to domestic wells. And we're in the preliminary stages of developing those mailing lists and such. And I can talk to you offline about how we're going to be targeting those mailings.
And Miguel, in section 4 of the early action plan, we kind of describe a process to work to develop an address in assessor parcel numbers. And we will be looking for outside of public water systems, or where we know there's boundaries, and try and work outside of those.
Right.
There's always a chance that fringe area, that boundary area, we may miss and overreach and target some people that don't need to be targeted. But the intent is to focus on very specific areas using good GIS database tools.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And Adam, I saw you start to unmute. We still have you here?
I'm still here. I'm just listening and taking it all in. I don't have any questions right now, Perry, but after I get a look at the draft and everything, I might call you up with a few.
Great, thanks, Adam. Okay, anyone else? Well, appreciate your time and interest in this program. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and any comments, input that you have is welcome as we develop these plans further. And you see the contact information. You're also welcome to request this PowerPoint. It will be part of the video, but if you just want the PowerPoint, you can request that also. So I think that's it for the day. Thank you again, everyone.